Hello, welcome back. It's Nikki Clarke here, the Nikki Clarke Show, live on Instagram. And we have yet another amazing interview for you. I'm so excited to have her on the show with you. She is the Member of Provincial Parliament for Beaches, East York, and she's a great friend. Rima Berns McGowan is going to be joining us. And as you join, I'm going to give you a wave. Thank you so much, Carmina. So we're just waiting for Rima to join us and other friends to join us. And she's going to tell us a little bit about her story leading up to becoming member of provincial parliament. And she's just a phenomenal woman. She's done so many great things in the community, and she's with us right now. So I'm just going to add. So I hope you're having a wonderful afternoon, and thank you so much for dropping by and saying hello. And as you come by, I'm going to give you a wave. Gadi, thank you so much for joining. And Rima is just warming up her system, and we'll be right with her. Janessa, thank you so much for joining, and we'll have a chat with her. And I had the pleasure of running alongside with Rima during the 2018 provincial elections, and she's just a wonderful person. She's such an engaging and warm person, and extremely sharp when it comes to all the topics in the community in terms of where we are with. Well, I'll save that for Rima to share that with you. So we're just waiting for her to join us. So Kay Jammy, thank you so much for joining. I just gave you a wave, and I see that Rima is on the line, but you know, it's live and it's the internet and anything can happen. But let's see if we can get her back again. So I'm going to add her one more time, and we'll have a great conversation. And I see that she's warming up. There we go. Rima.
It wasn't sending my requests, but anyway, here I am. I made it.
Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Awesome. I really appreciate it. So how's your day going?
It's really fun to do this. I mean, it's hectic.
How was your day?
Being an
Hectic?
MPP right now is it's hectic every day, wilder than the last. You know, I mean, this has been quite a journey. We really need to get you in with us, so please, next time, we need you in here.
We're gonna keep working hard. Well, I got 2 years to make it happen, right? I need your help. But yes, definitely we want to join forces, amplify voices for great change. So Rima, again, thank you so much. And I really wanted to get people to know a little bit more about you, because I've had the pleasure of having chats with you, and I appreciate what you shared. But maybe not everyone knows the story behind the story, and whatever you can share with us, can you tell us a little bit about your background leading up to becoming the MPP for Beaches East York?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for asking. So I think it's crucial to know that I was born in South Africa. I come from a mixed background. My parents left because of apartheid when I was about 4, moved to Montreal. And I think they, and certainly I, was really shocked at the level of anti-Black racism that I experienced, and systemic racism that I experienced growing up. I think my dad really naively thought he was leaving a lot of that behind, but it isn't. That wasn't my reality growing up, and it was from peers, and it was from their parents, but it was also from teachers at school, and it was the anti-Semitism that I experienced was very much, you're a heathen, but we could fix that because in theory we could convert you. But the anti-Black racism was very different. It was you're not human, you're not fully human, you'll never be. There's
Not
nothing
fully human.
that was really the sense that was imparted. So I became I think I became very aware of issues of racism and equity when I was 4.5 years old, in terms of how it was really hitting. And so I became an activist, and I think I have been since then. I was, before doing this, I was teaching at the University of Toronto at Mississauga. I was teaching diaspora studies, and I'm an introvert. And so I never in my life expected to be in a role like the one that I'm in. About 6 months before the election, I was approached by some folks in the Riding Association here. And it was they, as well as former students of mine, who really convinced me to step up and run on the grounds that the things that I'd been talking about were how systems work and how systems of racism and discrimination work, and the kinds of solutions that we could put in place to create an environment that is equitable for everybody.
Right.
So in the end, even though it was way out of my comfort zone, as a person who's fundamentally a one-on-one mentor, a writer, and again an introvert, I decided to step up and run, because I thought, even if I can spend a few years just talking about what does it mean to have equitable systems, and how do you get there from where we are, and where are the places where we already have advantages, and where are the places where we have huge gaps. So that's really why I stepped up, and there were some amazing organizers in the riding who helped me to get elected. And then, of course, it's just been a wild ride since I got here. I feel very fortunate to be here and to be a member of the Black Caucus, along with such awesome folks like Laura May Lindo and Jill Andrew and Kevin Yard and Faisal Hassan, and some other just really dynamite MPPs. But we're up against a behemoth. We're up against a government that doesn't have the slightest clue as to what systemic racism is or how it functions. It doesn't have the slightest desire to change it. It keeps saying these sort of pablum things, but then not acting on them. So it's been just quite an extraordinary place to find myself.
Wow. Rima, you have extraordinary strength, and I know there's a lot more to what you shared in terms of your journey, but I thank you for what you've told us. But it paints a picture of just the tenacity you have in terms of getting things done, and I know you're a doer. Saturday that passed, you were at Celebration Square for Black Lives Matters, and I know that we have been processing a lot of information, a lot of images over the past few days since May 25th and before. But now we are collectively making decisions and putting into action that enough is enough, right? And my hope is that there's going to be systematic measures put in place so that the systemic racism can be eradicated and everyone can win, right? Anti-Black racism hurts everybody, not just the Black community, everybody. And we could see that everyone was outraged and just in grief to see what we saw and to hear what we saw. So with all that I've said, how have you been dealing with it as a public figure? How has your family been dealing with it? And tell us a little bit about what happened this past Saturday with Black Lives Matters in Celebration Square.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a really brutal time. I think it's very difficult to be in public life right now, because you have to process your own emotions and your own sense of ongoing trauma and your ongoing sense of absolute exhaustion, but you also have to step up and be there for people when they need it, and you have to hold space for everybody. And I think that's a really key piece, is that you can't just shut down, and you can't say to some people, well, you're not up to speed, so sorry, but we can't talk right now. You literally, unless somebody is an outright racist, you actually have to be there to hold space for them. And you have to help them. One of the things that I wrote I sometimes write pieces on Facebook that just help me to process and help to let everybody out there know where I am and what I'm thinking. And one of the things that I said was that it's great that people know that they shouldn't be saying racist stuff, but that's like crawling when we're talking about getting to systemic change. And we need everybody to not just crawl, but to be, to toddle, and then to walk, and then to run, and then to sprint, because we need everybody sprinting to make the
Yes.
changes that we need.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
holding space for everybody, teaching people, bringing everybody along, because we're going to need every voice. Every voice in this country has to understand that when there are systems in place that hurt primarily Black and Indigenous people, that actually they're hurting everyone. And we need people to understand that we're all connected. And so we need every voice to make those changes. The systems that are in place, and it's, we've got to understand that whether it's education or whether it's healthcare or whether it's the child welfare system, certainly policing and the criminal justice system and the media, all of these systems are hurting people every day. They are actively harming, if not murdering, Black and Indigenous people particularly, and then other people who are racialized as well. And I think about this moment that we're at with COVID. I think that part of what's happening is that we're at an extraordinary moment where the murder of George Floyd followed almost immediately by that very suspicious death that should never have happened of Regis Korchinski-Paquette. These things came at a time when COVID-19 had shone this incredibly harsh light on how these systems are inequitable, on the ways that it is felling people of color, particularly Black and Indigenous people more than others, that racialized folks were suffering because of the way that poverty works, because of where people are housed and how they're housed, because they have to take essential jobs that didn't allow them to work from home, that because they were on transit, all of these kinds of things. And then you have this police brutality layered on top of it. And all of a sudden, these tensions that have been there forever, that anybody with eyes and anybody certainly who's Black has experienced it, suddenly are there for everybody to see. And on Saturday, I was at Celebration Square because in January, a young man who was unarmed, was in a car, shot in the back of the head by a Peel police officer. And he died in hospital a few days later. At the time, the family didn't want his name released. But after everything that's happened, they did want it to become public. They still haven't had no closure, no response from the SIU. And that is really unacceptable. And so they permitted this vigil to be held. This young man's name was Jamal Francique. And it's really important to know that he is one of many, many, many Black and Indigenous people who have been murdered by the police where there was no reason for that to happen. He was unarmed. And there has not been accountability. These systems do not work. We right now have systems of policing that are meant to keep everybody safe, but that clearly don't. They keep some people safe, but some people they don't. And that is not tenable. We need to have systems in place that keep all of us safe. And I think the beauty of this moment that we're in is that we have an opportunity to completely reimagine what these systems look like. Right. So we have limited collective resources. There are only so many dollars that we have. We need to think about how we can spend them in ways that keep all of us safe and that contribute to the well-being and the good life of every single solitary person who lives on Turtle Island.
Okay, excellent. I was speaking to a colleague the other day, and we were talking about systemic racism. And he very pointedly said that systemic racism was designed that way. It wasn't something like a happenstance or something that kind of permeate or navigated into that. It was always set up that way. What would you think? What would your response be?
So I think that she's right. I think that we need to really take stock of the fact that we are living on a land that was settled violently, and that our history has been a history of erasure and violence towards Indigenous people, towards Black people. There was slavery in Canada that we don't learn about in school. We learn about being the end of the Underground Railroad. We don't learn about the extent to which slavery occurred here. We don't learn about the intense history of violence and erasure towards primarily Black and Indigenous people that has been rooted in all of these systems. So it's not an accident, and it's not a few bad apples here and there. It is fundamentally woven into the very DNA of these systems. So if we're going to fix them, it isn't just a question of a few superficial tinkerings here and there. It has to be a fundamental reimagining and remaking of these systems, putting in place the well-being, the good life of each and every one of us. We have the roadmaps, if you will, the TRC and its calls to action. That's a roadmap. We have so many different studies that have been done that say these are the pieces that need to be in place if we're going to have a life that works for everybody. We now just need to take them seriously, and we need to understand that policing and prisons and the criminal justice system as it has been constructed, that they don't work. They just don't work. So we need to decide how we are going to redistribute those precious collective resources that we have.
Okay, and Rima, as you allude to those resources, we also know that there's been an effort to collect race-based data. Is that correct? And what are we going? Where are we going with that?
Well, again, we're up against a society that in many areas is resistant to collecting it, because if you collect it, then you're confronted with the evidence. So much of what is exhausting for Black people and Indigenous people is proving the oppression to the oppressor over and over and over and over again. If you collect the data and you collect it in thoughtful and careful ways that don't further oppress people or further expose them to oppression, then that data is part of what everybody has access to, and it takes a lot of the weight off Black people and Indigenous people to keep pulling out those receipts. Desmond Cole's book is brilliant. That's what it is. It is one receipt after another over the course of a year to say these are the ways in which anti-Black racism plays out constantly in these violent ways. And so when you have that data there, it gives you the groundwork to start pushing forward with this deep systemic foundational transformation. But we're up against, we're up against real resistance. So if you look just in Ontario, the Premier said he doesn't believe in collecting race-based data. He also said he doesn't believe in systemic racism. We know that we need it, and we're now starting to get it. But one of the first things the government did was to gut the ARD, which had the Anti-Racism Directorate, which had been moving in that direction. So now you have real movement to say, and again, it's the opportunity, I think, of what COVID has exposed, to say you can really see that it is the areas of the city where the most Black and racialized people live that have been hardest hit by COVID. And so if we're going to fix all of those underlying conditions, we need to have the data. The case that horrible case of Leonard Rodriguez, who was the personal service worker who was denied a test, denied treatment, is the most egregious example, but it's not the only one. I've been told stories that are very similar of other people. And we have to fix this. We have to fix it. So getting people to understand how important the thoughtful collection of race-based data is the first step, not the last step.
Okay, excellent. Rima, can you tell us a little bit how things are going in your constituency in terms of, the help that's available for those who are challenged through COVID? I know there was prevalent joblessness. I think, maybe things are a little bit alleviating themselves, and some people are going back to work, but there's still a lot of people out of work. And then in terms of shelter and also mental health supports, how are things working? I know that's a lot of work for you, but what supports are available?
So I'm the critic for poverty and homelessness, and I could talk to you for hours on the way that the crisis in homelessness has been mishandled, particularly during this pandemic. It was a crisis before. We called for it to be named a crisis, an emergency, and for dollars to be released to start to really provide first, on the first level, the shelters that are needed, but also the housing that is needed for people experiencing homelessness in Toronto, but across the province as well. About 40% of the province's homeless folks live in the GTA, but that means 60% are, as far as we know, folks using shelter in the rest of the province. Those folks did not have adequate ways to self-isolate during the pandemic. We have had, obviously, people are kicked out of shelters during the day. They need space to be if they're not feeling well. There are outbreaks in shelters. This is the government, from all levels of government, are at fault here. The city simply doesn't have the resources to provide places, hotel rooms, or other places where people can self-isolate. And so that has been and is an ongoing source of the spread of the virus. People who need places to sit if they're not feeling well will sometimes go and take the TTC. Sometimes they don't know that they're ill with COVID because there hasn't been universal testing. We know that the TTC then becomes a place where the virus is spread. Essential workers are taking the TTC to work. They're catching the virus on the TTC. They're taking it home to neighborhoods where they can't self-isolate because there are many people in small apartments. That's true of this riding as well in places like Crescent Town or along Dawes Road. This riding is an interesting one because it has very high levels of socioeconomic being, but then also very deep pockets of poverty. It's almost 40% racialized folks, and those folks tend to live in the less well-off areas in the riding. About 80% of the work that we do as an office is in supporting folks who are not well off at all. And those are the areas where COVID indeed has hit the hardest. There isn't sufficient funding for mental health supports, which are obviously a huge need. And, even people who are relatively well off, who have two parents working from home, which is a huge gift and blessing and privilege during this pandemic. If you're working from home and you're trying to keep your kids schooled and keep them well and keep their mental health in good shape, your own mental health is stress, to put it mildly. So this is a really, really, really difficult time. A lot of people have small businesses that have been under huge stress.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and the help has not been forthcoming. We're also very, very concerned about how renters are going to fare. The premier has not given anybody rent relief. Instead, he said, hey, if you only have enough money for food, don't pay your rent, just eat because you need to eat, which is great advice, except that he also said to the landlords, just work it out. And to no surprise of anybody except perhaps the premier, landlords haven't been doing that. And so we've noticed here in this riding, and I know it's been happening across the city and likely across the province, where people have been banging on the doors. The landlords managers have been banging on doors with debit machines, trying to force people to pay money that they don't have in the middle of a pandemic. There is, as you know, a sort of temporary ban on evictions occurring because they won't actually follow through on them. But at some point, that's going to end. And landlords have been giving people eviction notices in the expectation that at some point they will be able to follow through and kick people out. As the critic for homelessness, where I can see that the shelters are already overcrowded, what are you going to do when they start booting people out because they don't have money to pay their rent or arrears? It's not okay. It's just not okay.
Right.
I think we desperately need, and on top of that, there's a bill making its way through the legislature that's actually going to make it easier to evict people. None of this is okay. We have to stop it. We have to actually have rent relief. We have to make sure that there are no COVID-related evictions, and people need help.
Okay. Yes.
So that's just
wow.
that's just a small taste of the things I work on. Yeah. But I do feel, if I can go back to that deep system reform, as I mentioned at the beginning, as an introvert, this is a very uncomfortable place for me to be. I'm much more comfortable sitting and writing and one-on-one conversations. But I also do feel that I have been thinking about why and how we go about systems reform for a very, very, very long time. And I feel like this is the reason that I was called to do this. It Absolutely. Is to stand up and to add my voice really strongly now to say these systems have to be rebuilt from the ground up in a way that makes all of us safe and allows all of us to live a good life, because that Absolutely. Is the only way that Canadian society works.
Absolutely, absolutely, Rima. I just want to say that I respect you so much, and I admire all your work, incredible work for the community, so much time and dedication, and I know that you have a family, so you juggle many parts of your journey. So I guess the question now is, how do you take care of yourself through it all?
That is a good question. That's a good question. I mean, I have 4 amazing kids. They're all grown and they're all doing wonderful things. So I guess, very lucky at this point that I'm not trying to take care of children and make sure that they're okay while doing my work. So at this point, mm-hmm. The people I take care of are constituents, and then the folks with the issues that I work on. I'm also very, very lucky that my partner deals with anxiety by foraging and cooking. Magnificent.
Awesome.
I'm very blessed that he does all the cooking, and all the cooking Wonderful. Is absolutely wonderful. And then I do actually put a lot of attention into taking care of myself. I take time to exercise every day. We have a dog. We had two, and we recently had to say goodbye to one of them, and that was
Oh,
just
I'm so sorry.
just very recently. So a that's still a big heartbreak. But we
Mm,
still have the younger one, and so we take turns taking him for walks. Um, and that's helpful to get outside. You know, one of us will go in the morning, one of us will go at night. So we both take turns doing that. I take a lot of time to meditate and
yes.
to ground myself. I think that's really important. And I just take time to breathe. One of the things that I did near the beginning of the pandemic was to say I put out a call on social media to say, you know, if you need me, if you need a phone call, for any reason, or if you know anybody who needs one, just let me know. I will be
Right.
there. And I meant it. And actually, as an introvert, that actually is a really good way of being in touch with people and being able to help. I love problem solving. I love reaching out to people. I love these deep one-on-one conversations. Those are really good. By the end of the day, I really need some downtime. And so I
Mm.
take it again. I meditate, and I have found puzzles to be a really good thing to do. So I've been going up to Old School General Store, which is this wonderful mom and mom um, general store in East York, and they have a wonderful selection of very beautiful puzzles with lovely themes of lots of diverse people, and it's just quite wonderful. And I found these 1,000 piece puzzles are actually a good way to kind of meditate and like do something that's not street screen time. And then of
Yeah.
course, you know, I have distance visits with my kids, and we sort of sit 6 feet apart from one another. And at one point, my daughter had to get a COVID test because she works frontline, doing mental health and addictions outreach work. And after she had had her test and came back negative, and then I knew that I had been like inside for 2 weeks, I was like, wait, we can hug. That was
Oh,
a special moment. So, you
what
know,
a
I try,
beautiful moment.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Little things like that actually go a long way.
Yeah. Well, we've got more, I guess, clarity in terms of social circles and a little bit of lifting with certain bands, public gatherings and that. So a little bit at a time, but it's all for the purpose of safety. So we get it, but it is hard. It's hard being away from
It's
family and
really
friends,
hard.
but
And I
we'll
think
get there.
it's hard for, I think many people are very lonely. I think it's very hard for us to not see people that we love and hug them. It's very hard to stay 6 feet apart. It's hard to just have, birthday dinners on Zoom. Like, what is that?
I know.
You
Or
know,
weddings on Zoom,
or
and
on Zoom.
unfortunately sometimes funerals on Zoom.
And
That
I,
must be
and
so difficult.
I think that for me, that has been the most difficult thing
Yeah,
to help people through is the not being able to be with people who are ill, um, or who are dying, to not be able to be with them at a funeral, to not, to not, to have to do a funeral in this strange technological way
yes,
where you can't have the comfort of a hug.
I know.
I, you know, that has been some of the most heartbreaking part of the last few months, um,
Yes.
because it's just been really, it is, it's not how we're meant to live as human beings.
No, no, not at
And
all.
there has been so much grief. There has been so much trauma. There's been the personal things that we've just been talking about, but there's also been the bigger things that we were talking about earlier, and they compound. So,
Absolutely.
you know,
Absolutely.
exactly, everybody is just feeling so weighted down by the trauma that's personal, the trauma that's um, out there in the world, the pain of having to figure out how to work through it, often without the closeness of a good hug, of a shared meal,
Yes.
of a good cry on a friend's shoulder. hard.
Yeah. And I know that I'm a hugger. You're a hugger too, Rima. So it's like, ah,
I know.
where's my pillow? Oh, okay, I got to get it out somehow. Well, Rima, I thank you so much for your time. I know that you've got a lot on the go, but I appreciate you stopping by to share your pearls of wisdom. And where can people reach out to you on social media if they want to connect with you, constituents, or just, fans of Rima? How can they
Yeah,
reach you?
please do feel free to reach out. I respond to all the DMs. So you can find me on Facebook as Rima Berns McGown. Just check how to spell that because all the spelling is weird, but I am the only one in the world, so you will be able to find me. There's the public page, but there's also my personal pages, which is where I tend to post the more interesting thought pieces and essays, and all of those are public. So you can find me there. I'm on Twitter as Bay Rima. That's Beaches East York, BEY Rima, RIMA. And I'm here on Instagram as Rima Berns M. And you've got it up on the screen. The spelling is RIMABERNSM. Yeah, so thank you so much. We are living through incredibly difficult times, but I also think you can see the clouds opening and a path appearing. And I think that there is an appetite for real change, not just the usual nods. No more kneeling, performative kneeling. If you have the ability to make change, make change. If you have the ability to advocate, advocate. Hold your political leaders accountable. There really is an appetite to make it real, and enough with the performativity. We got to make it happen.
Right. The momentum is now. We're ready, and step in. Step right in. We need leaders. There's been a lot of couch criticism, but now we need people to step in the ring and do what you're supposed to do. So I thank you so much, Rima, for doing your advocacy work and being the courageous voice for East York Beaches. So thank you again. And when I see you, I can't wait to give you a big hug. All the best to you and your family.
Big hug. Thank you so much, Nikki.
My pleasure. All right. And if you didn't get to see the whole interview, don't worry. We're going to post it on Instagram. And it's also going to be uploaded onto my YouTube page, The Nikki Clarke Show. So like, comment, and also subscribe to the channel. Rima Berns McGown, thank you again. Bye for now. Stay safe. Stay strong.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone, for joining.